This is the story of how a dream turned into a nightmare, standing now at a crossroads. Not every promise is easy to keep, especially the ones made in sickness and in health. On this journey, I opened a sealed envelope that carried a truth capable of shaking my relationship to its core. That envelope contained my wife's medical report, uncovering the reality behind her illness. I'm a 40-year-old man, married to Lauren, a 41-year-old woman for the past 6 years. We weren't the kind of couple who shouted love from the rooftops, but I always believed there was mutual trust and respect between us. I thought I had married a mature and sensible woman who didn't need constant attention. But, as it turns out, I was wrong. Everything changed when Lauren suddenly fell gravely ill. At first, I thought it was just a case of food poisoning. But her condition kept deteriorating. She couldn't stop vomiting and couldn't keep down any food or water. Her skin turned pale, she grew weak, and she became severely dehydrated. Reluctant to go to the hospital, Lauren insisted she was terrified of needles and IV drips. I tried everything to nurse her back to health at home, but as her condition worsened, I had no choice but to take her to the hospital. As they wheeled her into the emergency room, I hugged her tightly and reassured her that she would be okay, that I was there for her, and that I wouldn't leave her side. Over the next 48 hours, her condition stabilized but left her frail and bedridden. The doctors wanted to determine if there was an underlying condition causing her symptoms. They said the test results would take 2 days, during which I stayed by her side, not leaving the hospital room even once. On the 3rd day, things took a drastic turn. A nurse handed me a sealed envelope saying the doctor would explain everything soon. I was terrified to open it, but equally desperate to know the truth. When I finally opened the envelope and read the report, it felt like my world had stopped. The words on the page refused to register in my mind. My thoughts spiraled out of control. I kept telling myself it had to be a mistake, maybe a mix-up with the samples. I confronted the doctor, pointing to the part of the report that had shaken me to my core. "This can't be true, right? There must be a mistake," I stammered. But the doctor's response was firm. "I'm sorry, but the tests are accurate. We need to start treatment immediately. It's critical she completes her antibiotics course." It was then I realized my wife had an STD. The implications were clear, but I wasn't ready to accept them. I handed Lauren the report when she woke up without saying a word. She read it and her face turned crimson. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stammered, "I can explain." But I couldn't hold back my frustration. My voice rose as I demanded answers. "Explain what? How did you get an STD in this marriage? We haven't been intimate in months." Her silence only deepened the storm of questions raging in my mind. Was she unfaithful? Had our marriage been built on lies? This was the moment that made me realize that every relationship isn't just built on love. It's built on trust and honesty, too. It felt like we were all waiting for someone to break the silence. I realized that if this awkward moment dragged on, it would only get worse. So, I took a deep breath and decided to break the ice. I smiled faintly, feeling slightly embarrassed, but I tried to appear composed. My intention wasn't to make things uncomfortable. I said, attempting to lighten the mood. "Don't look so tense. I was just passing by, really." Jack and Nathan exchanged a quiet glance, seemingly communicating silently. After a moment, Jack sighed and gave a faint smile. "Are you sure, Ava? Are you not feeling uncomfortable?" he asked, his voice full of uncertainty. I immediately reassured them, trying to ease their concerns. "No, I'm fine. In fact, I think I love you both even more," I quickly added, trying to make them laugh. They both looked at me in surprise, and for a moment there was a silent understanding between us. Then, I thought of a way to make things less awkward. I grabbed Jack's hand and motioned toward Nathan. "Let's go to my room and talk for a bit, okay? Let's consider this my way of making up for the awkwardness," I suggested. They seemed surprised by the idea, but after a brief pause, they nodded. It felt like the only way to diffuse the tension. I smiled and started walking toward my room, and they both followed slowly behind me. When the three of us sat on my bed, I decided to make a joke to lighten the mood. I looked at Nathan and teased, "So, was the movie that good? You both didn't even realize the time." Nathan laughed awkwardly, covering his face with his hands. "Come on, Ava. Stop teasing. We just didn't think you'd actually hear it." "I thought you turned up the volume so I could hear it," I said with a playful smirk. We all laughed, and after talking for a while, the tension began to fade. I felt like my curiosity was getting the better of me. I looked at Nathan and Jack, wondering if I should bring up the thought that had just crossed my mind. After a moment of hesitation, I mustered the courage and asked, "Do you think we could try doing what happened in that movie?" Before I could stop myself, the words slipped out, and I immediately regretted them. I wasn't sure how they would react, but curiosity consumed me. Nathan and Jack looked at me, their eyes wide with shock at what I had just said. "Are you serious?" Nathan asked, his voice full of confusion. He seemed like he couldn't believe I was suggesting something so bold. I nodded, trying to keep my expression serious. "I'm just curious. It wouldn't hurt to try, would it?" My voice trailed off, and I couldn't meet their eyes. Jack responded immediately, his tone firm as both of them avoided looking at me. However, I didn't give up. I gently squeezed their hands, trying to reassure them. "Just once. I really want to know what it's like," I said softly. They were silent for a while, and after a moment, I could see the conflict in their eyes. Nathan sighed and said reluctantly, "All right, but just once, and it has to stay a secret. No one can ever know." The room grew quiet as we sat there, breathing softly. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We started carefully, each action deliberate and cautious, yet filled with a strange energy. I wasn't sure how much time passed, but it felt like the world around us had disappeared, leaving only the three of us. By the time the sun had set, we were lying next to each other in silence. The awkwardness I had feared was completely gone. Instead, I felt a deep connection, as though we had gone through something intense together. Later, we went to the kitchen to prepare lunch. Everything felt oddly natural, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But deep down, I knew that something between us had shifted. Instead of regret, I felt a new bond that brought us closer. At one point, Nathan looked at me with a soft smile and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I nodded, returning his smile. "I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more," I replied, blushing at my own words. I can't express how terrified I was. The likelihood of being infected was incredibly high, even though I had no symptoms. I gave my blood sample and left the hospital while they extended Chia's stay for further treatment. I wandered aimlessly for hours, replaying every moment in my head, the confession, the betrayal, the lies, the utter disrespect. My phone buzzed repeatedly with her messages, but I ignored them. I couldn't deal with her just yet. I devised a plan. There was no way I would let her waltz back into my life as if nothing had happened. I packed all her belongings, clothes, makeup, that ridiculous collection of scented candles, and threw them into the trunk of her car in the basement. Then, I called a cleaning service to sanitize the entire apartment. Call me crazy, but I felt like she had spread germs everywhere. I wanted every trace of her erased. Next, I searched for a lawyer and booked an online meeting to discuss my case. I was determined not to spend another day with this vile woman. I never showed up at the hospital again. Later, I got a call from the hospital about paying her bills to ensure her treatment continued smoothly. But I didn't care. She could handle her existence on her own. She left me angry voicemails accusing me of being a terrible husband. She even had the audacity to say that we vowed to care for each other in sickness and health, and I was breaking that promise by abandoning her. Furious, I thought about those vows. What about her promise to be faithful? Why didn't she think of those vows before betraying me? The gaslighting was pathetic. On the day she was discharged, the hospital flooded my phone with calls, likely to get me to pay the bills, which were beyond the coverage provided by insurance. I ignored them all. I knew her credit card wouldn't have enough to cover the costs. But why should I get involved? She eventually called a co-worker to pick her up. Even when she arrived at our apartment, I didn't let her in. Her keys were inside the house since she hadn't taken them with her when I admitted her, so she couldn't unlock the door. I yelled through the door, telling her she wasn't allowed inside. I informed her that her belongings were in the basement and loaded into the trunk of her car. I slid her car keys under the door and left her sobbing and knocking outside. After a while, I noticed her co-worker, Lauren, had left, and Chia was now alone at the door, crying and begging to be let in. She pleaded for a chance to talk and resolve things, even asking for mercy until she fully recovered. I couldn't believe she expected me to be sensitive to her situation. Seriously? After roaming around town, exposing herself to God knows what, and endangering me in the process, she wanted compassion. She had the nerve to say sorry and call it a mistake we could work through once she got better. I shouted back that it wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate betrayal of our marriage. I couldn't even bear to look at her anymore. Eventually, I saw her leave in her car, taking what she had collected from the basement. Meanwhile, my test results came back. Thank God they were negative. I felt a brief moment of relief, as if I had dodged a bullet. But the fact that she had put me in harm's way was unforgivable. The doctor informed me I would need to retest in a month since it could take time for the virus to show up. While I was relieved, the possibility of infection still loomed. I initiated divorce proceedings and booked a slot in LA to begin the process. I had no idea where she was or how she was living. Her messages had shifted from apologies to threats, claiming she would tell everyone how terrible a husband I was for leaving her in this condition. If she spilled her tea, I wouldn't care. I'd sit back and enjoy her excuses. Her attempts to guilt-trip me into taking her back only highlighted her lack of accountability. Years of lies and reckless decisions had destroyed everything. My choice to protect myself wasn't abandonment. It was survival after years of deceit. When I went for a second test, it too came back negative. Thank God for that. Lauren didn't give up easily. She called her parents, telling them I abandoned her at the hospital and kicked her out of the house. Without a single phone call or clarification, they showed up at my house, demanding an explanation. I wasn't surprised. I calmly asked them, "Did she tell you why? If not, don't you think it's only fair to ask for the details before accusing me of anything? Since you're here, let me tell you the truth. Your daughter cheated on me. Not just with one man, but with several, and in the process, she contracted an STD, putting my health at risk too. Did she mention that part? Of course not. She was too busy painting herself as the victim. The shock on her face was priceless. Her mother immediately called her and demanded to know if it was true. I don't know what Lauren said on the other end, but her mother started yelling at her, calling her a fool. Her father's face turned red with anger. Lauren grabbed the phone from her mother, shouting back, "Don't you feel any shame for your actions? And on top of it, you lied to us about being abandoned?" She handed the phone back to her mother and stormed out. As the paperwork for the divorce was being prepared, she kept calling and yelling, but it didn't faze me. My lawyer contacted her for her address to send the papers. When the papers finally reached her parents' house, her mother called me again. She begged me to give Lauren another chance. Her mother told me Lauren had stayed in a motel for a week after I kicked her out, but her health deteriorated and she begged her parents to take her in. They had no choice. She was fired from her job after one of her colleagues somehow found out about her condition, and you know how harsh the stigma around STDs can be. She tried to blame me for exposing her, but I didn't care. After what she did, protecting her reputation wasn't my responsibility. Her mother pleaded with me, asking if I could show some mercy until Lauren recovered, claiming she wasn't in a position to go through a divorce due to her mental health. She even requested that I postpone the divorce proceedings and maybe help with the medical bills. Lauren had lost her job, exhausted her savings on treatments, and was financially ruined. Her mother even suggested we live together temporarily until Lauren got back on her feet. I couldn't believe the audacity. Lauren had been sleeping with multiple men, and now that she was tired and broken, she wanted me to pick up the pieces. I laughed bitterly and told her mother, "Lauren made her bed. Now she has to lie in it." Lauren sent me a heartfelt email full of apologies. It was the first time she genuinely seemed remorseful. Up until now, it had all been gaslighting and playing the victim. She begged for a chance to prove herself and promised to be a better wife. I ignored her. She described herself as a shadow of her former self. Broken, drowning in medical bills, with no job, no friends, and a tarnished reputation. She couldn't even get hired at other salons due to her ruined image. Her friends had distanced themselves, and even her siblings had disowned her. She didn't visit her parents often because her father, a traditional man, couldn't bear the disgrace she brought to the family. He couldn't stand her presence. In my eyes, it was only her mother who still had some hope for her. Even so, financial stress seemed to weigh heavily on her as well. Amidst all this, Lauren spiraled into depression. She stayed in bed for days, barely eating, but I knew better. Broken trust cannot be rebuilt. Lauren thought she could have her cake and eat it too, but she was wrong. Now, she's living with the consequences of her actions. Lauren lied, cheated, risked my health, and tried to manipulate her way out of accountability. Cleaning up her mess was not my job. Her mother's requests for me to postpone the divorce or help her financially were absurd attempts to delay the inevitable. Fast forward to the divorce proceedings. It was a mess. Lauren refused to cooperate, arguing that she deserved a chance and pleading for compassion because of her health issues. She often broke down in front of the magistrate, swearing to do everything to save the marriage. I stood firm and even filed a case against her for endangering my life with a life-threatening virus. In her defense, she claimed she avoided intimacy with me to protect me, as if that justified her infidelity. I didn't fight over assets because dragging the process further wasn't worth it. Lauren was ordered to seek therapy as she exhibited erratic behavior. Over time, her physical health improved, but instead of accepting reality, she began asking me for another chance, claiming she was now pure and free of disease. Should I have taken her back simply because she recovered from an STD? Dealing with her antics was emotionally draining. The worst part was the misplaced sympathy she received for being sick, battling depression, and going through a divorce. No one seemed to consider how hard it was for me to endure the betrayal. Living with the thought that my wife didn't think I was enough and constantly sought validation from other men was soul-crushing. In the end, trust was broken beyond repair. Lauren's actions had consequences, and she had to live with them. While she sought redemption, I sought peace. And for me, that meant moving on. I had to pay her alimony and share half of my assets because I decided not to give my cheating wife another chance. As you can imagine, this made the divorce even uglier. Despite everything, Lauren kept dragging out tasks that a couples counselor had assigned us. Ironically, that counselor turned out to be helpful in ways I hadn't anticipated. By the time we started counseling, I was already checked out, doubting its purpose. But the counselor managed to bring everything into the open, making Lauren confront the reality of her actions. He helped her navigate her choices and understand that giving in to her desires was her decision. Similarly, he explained that I also had a choice, whether to forgive her or not. She couldn't force me to forgive her or move forward with her. The marriage had been over long before the legal process began. It was better for her to open her eyes and accept reality. Eventually, she did. It's over now, and I'm moving on with my life. As you can probably tell from the timeline of my posts and updates, it's been nearly 2 years since this all began. I feel like I've started a new life, but I'm still exhausted from all the stress and anxiety I've been dealing with. Sometimes I feel like disappearing or maybe moving to a new place where no one knows me. I'm just so tired of everything. I'm still seeing a therapist, hoping I'll come out of this low phase soon and restart my life. Do I regret losing half my assets and paying alimony to someone who betrayed me? Of course. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but there's one thing I won't give her, and that's forgiveness. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining me today. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time.